Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of Islam in Sri Lanka. It's a complex and rich topic that touches on history, culture, demographics, and some pretty heavy current issues. We're going to take a journey through time, from the arrival of the first Muslim traders to the challenges faced by the community today. We'll start by exploring how Islam first came to this beautiful island nation, tracing its roots back over 1,000 years. Then, we'll crunch some numbers to get a clear picture of the Muslim population in Sri Lanka today. We'll look at where Muslims live, what they do for a living, and how they balance their religious practices with daily life in Sri Lankan society. But it's not all smooth sailing. We'll also tackle some of the tough issues facing the Muslim community, including economic challenges and political representation. Finally, we'll address the sensitive but important topic of Islamophobia in Sri Lanka. So buckle up. We're about to take a deep dive into the story of Sri Lankan Muslims, their past, their present, and the challenges they face as they look to the future. It's a story of resilience, cultural richness, and the ongoing struggle for acceptance and equality. Let's get started. All right, let's dive deeper into the history of Islam in Sri Lanka. It's a pretty fascinating story that goes back over 1,000 years. So as I mentioned before, Islam first arrived in Sri Lanka around the 7th or 8th century CE. The main players in this story were Arab traders who were sailing the Indian Ocean trade routes. These guys were like the jet-setters of their time, you know? They'd sail from the Middle East, stop by India, and then swing down to Sri Lanka. Now, Sri Lanka, or Serendib as the Arabs called it, was a hot spot for trade. It was famous for its spices, especially cinnamon, and its precious gems. The Arab traders would come, do their business, and some of them started to stick around. At first, these Muslim traders mostly settled in coastal areas. Places like Beruwala, Gale, and Trincomalee became early Muslim settlements. Over time, they started to integrate with the local population. They'd marry local women, set up permanent homes, and gradually, a distinct Sri Lankan Muslim community began to form. But here's where it gets interesting. The spread of Islam in Sri Lanka wasn't just about these Arab traders. In the 13th century, you start to see Muslim missionaries arriving from places like India and Southeast Asia. These guys were actively trying to spread the faith, and they had some success, especially in the eastern parts of the island. Then you've got the Moors. These were Muslims of Arab descent who had settled in India, and some of them made their way to Sri Lanka too. They became a significant part of the Muslim population, especially in urban areas. Fast forward a bit to the colonial period, and you see another wave of Muslim arrivals. The Dutch brought in Malay Muslims from Southeast Asia as soldiers and political exiles. The British brought in Indian Muslims as laborers for the tea plantations. So you end up with this really diverse Muslim community in Sri Lanka. You've got the descendants of Arab traders, converted locals, Moors, Malays, and Indian Muslims, all forming this unique Sri Lankan Muslim identity. What's cool is that through all of this, the Muslim community managed to maintain its religious identity while also adapting to Sri Lankan culture. They developed their own dialect, a mix of Tamil and Arabic, called Sri Lankan Muslim Tamil. They've got their own architectural styles for mosques, their own cuisine, their own customs that blend Islamic traditions with Sri Lankan ones. It's a great example of how religion and culture mix and evolve over time. The story of Islam in Sri Lanka isn't just about a religion spreading, it's about how different cultures came together and created something new and unique. Pretty cool when you think about it, right? All right, let's dig into the numbers and demographics of Muslims in Sri Lanka. It's pretty interesting stuff when you start breaking it down. So, according to the most recent census data we have, which is from 2012, Muslims make up about 9.7% of Sri Lanka's total population. In real numbers, that's roughly 2 million people out of a total population of about 21 million. Now keep in mind that these numbers might have changed a bit since then, but they give us a good ballpark figure to work with. Here's where it gets really interesting. When we look at the breakdown within the Muslim community, the vast majority of Muslims in Sri Lanka, we're talking like 99% or more, are Sunni Muslims. They mostly follow the Shafi'i school of Islamic jurisprudence, which is pretty common in South and Southeast Asia. Now, Shia Muslims, they're a tiny minority within the Muslim community in Sri Lanka. We're talking less than 1% of the Muslim population. In fact, some estimates put the number of Shias at around 3,000 to 4,000 people. That's a drop in the bucket compared to the overall Muslim population. There are also small communities of other Islamic sects. You've got some Ahmadis and Bohras, but again, we're talking very small numbers here. What's really fascinating is how the Muslim population is distributed across the country. They're not evenly spread out, you know? The highest concentration of Muslims is in the Eastern Province, where they make up about 37% of the population. In some districts there, like Ampara and Trincomalee, Muslims are actually the largest ethnic group. In other parts of the country, the percentages vary. In the Western Province, which includes the capital Colombo, Muslims make up about 8% of the population. In the Central Province, it's around 10%. In some areas, like the Northern Province, the percentage is much lower, only about 3%. One thing to note is that the Muslim population in Sri Lanka has been growing faster than the overall population. Between the 1981 census and the 2012 census, the Muslim population grew by about 78%. Compared to a 43% growth in the overall population. This has led to some demographic shifts over time. It's also worth mentioning that most Sri Lankan Muslims identify ethnically as Moor or Sri Lankan Moor. This term comes from the colonial period and refers to their Arab ancestry. There are also smaller groups of Indian Muslims and Malays who are ethnically distinct but share the Islamic faith. So yeah, when you look at the numbers, you see this picture of a significant minority community that's predominantly Sunni, with a strong presence in certain regions and a growing demographic influence. It's a complex and diverse community within the broader tapestry of Sri Lankan society. Pretty fascinating when you break it down like this, right? All right, let's dive into the daily lives of Muslims in Sri Lanka. It's a pretty diverse picture, you know? So, first off, you'll find Muslims all over the country, but they're particularly concentrated in certain areas. The Eastern Province, like I mentioned before, has a huge Muslim population. Cities like Katankudi are almost entirely Muslim, but you've also got significant Muslim communities in urban areas like Colombo, Kandy, and Galé. Now, when it comes to what they do for a living, it's pretty varied. Historically, Muslims in Sri Lanka have been big in trade and commerce. You'll find a lot of Muslim-owned businesses, especially in sectors like textiles, jewelry, and spices. In fact, if you walk through the Peta market in Colombo, you'll see tons of Muslim-owned shops. But it's not just business. You've got Muslims in all kinds of professions. There are Muslim doctors, lawyers, teachers, government officials, you name it. In the Eastern Province, a lot of Muslims are involved in agriculture and fishing. One interesting thing is the role of Islamic banking in Sri Lanka. It's been growing in recent years, with several banks offering Islamic financial services. This has opened up new career opportunities for Muslims in the finance sector. Education is a big deal in the Muslim community. You'll find Muslim schools called madrasas all over the country. These schools teach the regular curriculum alongside Islamic studies, but plenty of Muslim kids go to regular public schools too. When it comes to daily religious practices, most Muslims in Sri Lanka follow the typical Islamic routines. They pray 5 times a day, fast during Ramadan, that kind of thing. You'll see mosques in Muslim neighborhoods, and on Fridays, they'll be packed for the Jumu'ah prayer. Food-wise, Sri Lankan Muslim cuisine is pretty unique. It's a blend of traditional Sri Lankan flavors with Middle Eastern influences. Dishes like watalappam, a coconut custard pudding, and biryani are popular not just among Muslims but with Sri Lankans in general. One thing that's pretty cool is how Sri Lankan Muslims have developed their own cultural traditions. They speak a dialect called Sri Lanka Muslim Tamil, which is a mix of Tamil and Arabic. Their traditional clothing often blends South Asian and Middle Eastern styles. In terms of community life, Muslims are pretty tight-knit. You've got lots of community organizations, welfare societies, and mosques that serve as social hubs. During festivals like Eid, you'll see big community celebrations. Now, it's worth mentioning that life for Muslims in Sri Lanka has had its challenges, especially in recent years. There's been some tension with other communities, and some Muslims have faced discrimination. But despite this, most Sri Lankan Muslims are deeply integrated into the broader society and proud of their dual identity as both Sri Lankan and Muslim. So yeah, when you look at the daily lives of Muslims in Sri Lanka, you see this vibrant community that's balancing traditional Islamic practices with modern Sri Lankan life. They're shopkeepers and professionals, students and farmers, all contributing to the rich cultural tapestry of the country. It's a pretty dynamic picture, you know? All right, let's get into the challenges and problems faced by the Muslim population in Sri Lanka. It's a complex situation, and it's been particularly tough in recent years. One of the biggest issues is the rise in communal tensions. There's been growing mistrust between the Muslim community and the Sinhalese Buddhist majority. This tension really ramped up after the end of the Civil War in 2009. You see, during the war, Muslims were kind of caught in the middle between the Sinhalese government and the Tamil separatists. After the war ended, some hardline Buddhist groups started portraying Muslims as a new threat to Sinhalese Buddhist culture. This led to some serious incidents of violence. In 2014, there were riots in Aluthgama, where Muslim-owned businesses were attacked. In 2018, there were more anti-Muslim riots in Kandy. These events left a lot of Muslims feeling vulnerable and scared. Then you've got the aftermath of the 2019 Easter Sunday bombings. Even though the vast majority of Sri Lankan Muslims condemned these attacks, there was a backlash against the whole community. Some Muslims faced harassment, boycotts of their businesses, and even physical attacks. It was a really tough time. Another big issue is political representation. Muslims often feel that their interests aren't adequately represented in the government. There have been Muslim politicians and parties, but they've struggled to have a strong voice in national politics. Economic challenges are also a concern. While there are certainly wealthy Muslims in Sri Lanka, many, especially in rural areas, face poverty and lack of economic opportunities. This has been exacerbated by Sri Lanka's recent economic crisis, which has hit all communities hard. Education is another area where there are some issues. While there are Muslim schools, there's been debate about the curriculum in these schools and whether they're promoting integration or separation from mainstream society. Some Muslims also report facing discrimination in higher education and job markets. There's also the challenge of balancing religious practices with national laws. For example, there's been controversy over Muslim personal laws, especially regarding marriage age and women's rights. Some argue these laws need reform, while others see attempts to change them as an attack on Muslim cultural autonomy. The rise of global Islamophobia has had an impact too. Sri Lankan Muslims sometimes feel they're being judged based on events happening in other parts of the world, which isn't fair to them. Another issue is internal community challenges. Like any community, Sri Lankan Muslims aren't monolithic. There are debates within the community about things like religious interpretation, cultural practices, and how to engage with the broader Sri Lankan society. And let's not forget the environmental challenges. Many Muslim communities in coastal areas were hit hard by the 2004 tsunami, and they're still dealing with the long-term impacts of that disaster. It's a lot to deal with, you know. Sri Lankan Muslims are facing this perfect storm of political, economic, social, and religious challenges. They're trying to maintain their cultural and religious identity while also fully participating in Sri Lankan society, and it's not always easy. But despite all these problems, many in the community remain resilient and hopeful for a more inclusive future. It's a tough situation, but they're hanging in there. All right, let's tackle the tough subject of Islamophobia in Sri Lanka. It's a sensitive issue, but it's important to address it head on. So, yeah, unfortunately, Islamophobia is definitely a thing in Sri Lanka. It's been on the rise, especially in the last decade or so. After the end of the Civil War in 2009, some hardline Buddhist nationalist groups started to portray Muslims as a new threat to the country's Sinhalese Buddhist identity. One of the most prominent organizations accused of promoting Islamophobia is the Bodu Bala Sena, BBS, which translates to Buddhist Power Force. These guys have been pretty vocal in their anti-Muslim rhetoric. They've made claims about Muslims trying to take over the country, about halal food being forced on non-Muslims, stuff like that. It's created a lot of tension. There have been other groups too, like Sinha Lay, Lion Blood, and Ravanabalaya that have been accused of stirring up anti-Muslim sentiment. They often use social media to spread their messages, which can reach a lot of people quickly. Now, this Islamophobia isn't just talk. It's led to some real-world consequences. There have been boycotts of Muslim-owned businesses, attacks on mosques, and even riots targeting Muslim communities. The riots in Aluthgama in 2014 and in Kandy in 2018 were particularly bad. After the Easter Sunday bombings in 2019, things got even worse. Even though the vast majority of Sri Lankan Muslims condemned the attacks, there was a backlash against the whole community. Some politicians and media outlets kind of fanned the flames, you know? There's been this growing narrative that tries to paint Muslims as somehow foreign or not truly Sri Lankan, despite the fact that Muslims have been part of Sri Lankan society for centuries. You see this in debates about things like halal certification, Islamic dress, or the building of mosques. One area where this struggle against Islam has been particularly visible is in education. There have been controversies over Islamic schools, with some groups claiming they're promoting extremism, even though there's no real evidence of this. It's not all doom and gloom, though. There are plenty of Sri Lankans, including many Buddhists, who speak out against Islamophobia. There are interfaith initiatives trying to build understanding between communities. Some politicians and religious leaders have called for unity and respect for all religions. The government has taken some steps to address the issue, but many Muslims feel not enough is being done. There's a sense that hate speech laws aren't always enforced when it comes to anti-Muslim rhetoric. One thing that's important to note is that this Islamophobia isn't just a Sri Lankan problem. It's part of a global trend that's affecting Muslim communities in many countries. But in Sri Lanka, it's mixed up with the country's complex history of ethnic and religious tensions. So yeah, Islamophobia is a real challenge in Sri Lanka. It's causing a lot of pain and division in the country. But there are also people working to combat it, trying to build a more inclusive society where all religions are respected. It's an ongoing struggle, and how it plays out will have a big impact on Sri Lanka's future. The hope is that over time, understanding and unity will win out over fear and division. But it's going to take work from all sides to make that happen. All right, that's a wrap on our deep dive into the Muslim community in Sri Lanka. I hope this video gave you a good overview of their rich history, current demographics, daily lives, and the challenges they're facing. It's a complex situation, but one that's so important to understand in today's world. If you found this information valuable, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I'm always working on bringing you in-depth looks at different cultures and communities around the globe. By subscribing, you'll be the first to know when I drop new videos like this one. Dear brothers and sisters, if you have any thoughts or experiences on this topic, leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspectives and maybe even get some ideas for future videos. Remember, understanding each other is the first step towards building a more inclusive world. So keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep an open mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.